All right, we are going to get started, and you can feel free to do some of the chat, do the Q&A if you like. Stephanie Chuen, who works with the Vin du Médoc, is here. She is going to help moderate some of the comments here. And for now, I'm going to try my best just to go through the material, and then we can take some of the questions a little bit later on, okay? Because I think that will be most efficient in our way of getting through some of this really great stuff that I want to tell you about the Medoc. So we will get started. And Stephanie, I just want to thank you so much for being here. Stephanie is French. She is she's one of the best people. She has her own public relations company, and it is amazing. She's amazing. If anybody ever needs a public relations company, work with Stephanie. She's fantastic. So, all right, here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about first a little bit about Bordeaux, because we need an orientation of where we are. And from some of the comments and questions that I got, I think we just need to step back and figure out, okay, where are we? What are we doing? And then we'll move forward into the Medoc, which is what we're talking about. I have some pretty visuals to share with you. I have some slides. We'll show some of that, but we'll mostly be talking. I said this in the email for the registration, but the way that these classes work, many of you have taken them before, some of you haven't, is that I'm going to talk to you for a little while give you an overview, just like we do in the podcast. I know most of you are podcast listeners, so it's almost like a live podcast with some pictures and maps and things like that. And then we'll get into the tasting portion. The wines, I know some of you were like, I couldn't get the exact wines, or I couldn't get that, or it was too expensive, or whatever. The wines are examples. That's always how we do this, right? So we're learning about the wines, and then the wines represent examples of what we're talking about. So if you don't have them right now, this is going to be up on YouTube, and it's okay. We can work it out later. Okay. So without further ado, let's talk about first Bordeaux. We need to get an orientation of where we are. And I'm going to start out just by showing you the map so that you can see where we are. And this is a basic map of Bordeaux. And what we have here is a place that's at 45 degrees north latitude. It is between the Atlantic Ocean, and this is the Gerond Estuary. An estuary is where rivers flow out to the sea. So if you've ever heard of brackish water or anything like that, that's, it's sort of this salty freshwater mix. And what happens here is that on this side where we see Saint-Emilion, there's a river called the Dordogne. And the Dordogne comes in from the Massif Central, which again, if you listen to the podcast, you've heard me talk about maybe 5 million times. It is a big mass of mountains that's in the center of France. And the Dordogne starts there and then flows out to the Atlantic here. We have another river that comes from the Pyrenees, and that is the Garonne. The Garonne flows through southwest France. It flows from the Pyrenees, and then it flows through this part where Grave is, Sauternes, all of those places, and then it goes into the Gironde. Now, in this map, you can just see the two little parts of the river that make a Y, and there's an area right here called Entrée du Mer, the area between two seas, which is really between two rivers, but let's not squabble about that. That's where it is. The area that we are concentrating on and what we are focused on is not this part, which is known as the right bank, okay? Why is it called the right bank? Because if you turn your body this way, right, you're going out to the Atlantic, what's on your right is the right bank. So that's the right side, right? On the left side is the left bank. It's really not very difficult, right? You're just walking, you're going down, and then this is the right side and that's the left side. That's where we get the banks of the rivers. So the right bank, Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, Le Land de Pomerol, all of these areas, Fronsac and Fronsac, even Blankenburg are part of the right bank. And then we have the left bank. Now, lower, more southerly in the left bank, we have places like Pessac-Léognan and Grave, Sauternes. Again, we've done podcasts on lots of this stuff, and I'm sure that you're familiar with these names. But the area that we are discussing is the Medoc. Now, the Médoc is a very focused area. It is an area that is different geologically from the rest of this area. Now, remember that Bordeaux is the most planted place in France. It is responsible for 1.5% of vineyard land in the world, 280,000 acres. I mean, this is an enormous area. The Médoc is just this area that is on the Gerond Estuary that goes out to the Atlantic, and the Atlantic has a lot of influence. There is a forest down here, the Lawn, and that is going to protect, it's a man-made forest, and it's going to protect this area from harsh breezes from the Atlantic. So we have a semi-sheltered area that has access to breezes, that has access to ports, which we will talk about from a financial perspective. What does that mean for the Médoc, and what has it meant traditionally? A lot, as it turns out. And there are 8 appellations within the Médoc. Okay, so we're talking about Médoc, which is both an overarching appellation, but it's also its own area. Then we have the Haut-Médoc, right, which is a little bit smaller, also encompasses a lot of areas, the second largest. And then we go through the communes. Now, this time we're going from north to south. So we're going to talk about the Médoc and the Haut-Médoc, and then we'll talk about St-Estèphe and Polyak. Next time, we're going to cover Saint-Julien, Listrac, Moulis, and Margaux. Okay, so these are the areas that we'll be covering. Now, when we talk about Médoc, we're only talking about 16,200 hectares, or around 40,000 acres. To give you a sense of what that is, Napa Valley is about 45,000. So it's smaller than Napa Valley. We have 2 types of areas. Like I said, the Médoc and the Haut-Médoc are going to be regional. These are areas that encompass other areas. And then we have communes. Those are more specific. In the system of appellations, the more specific and the smaller you get, the more kind of typicity, the more reliable in some ways it's going to be. You know what the flavors are going to be because it's only a very small percentage. But again, there's a lot of different factors here. Now, the Médoc makes about 100 million bottles a year, or about 8.3 million cases, if you think about it that way. So again, large area, but putting it in perspective, I think Yellowtail makes like 7 million cases. So the whole Médoc makes less than almost as much as Yellowtail. When we think about climate here, so what we're talking about is clearly a maritime climate, because what else could it be? You're right next to the Atlantic Ocean. The Gulf Stream is here. So you will have an area that is warmed by the Gulf Stream, and you have a lot of different mesoclimates. So mesoclimates are the climate of the area. Microclimates are the climates of the vines. So here we're talking about different areas just having a little bit of a different thing going on. We'll see that a lot with St-Estèphe when we talk about that. And if you listen to the podcast with Chateau Menet and Anne Lenore, she is just such a rock star, man, that woman kicks serious butt. But that show really talks about, like, gosh, St-Estèphe is like this weird outlier. We'll talk about that in a second. But again, different. And you can't just say, okay, well, it's in the Médoc. We have an area, generally speaking, that's sunny, that has sea breezes, that you're getting some airflow, which is going to help, because if it's really hot or if it's humid at all, that breeze will keep some of that disease off of the vines, which is exactly what you want here. You also need some coolness, especially as the climate is getting a little warmer. You need those refreshing breezes that are going to keep these wines full of acidity. It's going to also mitigate things like frost, which can be a very serious problem, and it can stop hail from forming. Hail is a very localized phenomenon, but here you're not necessarily going to get that, right? So as Stephanie's saying, yes, it's like a big hair dryer, right? Except on the cool setting, you're going to get that breeze, and that is going to lessen disease pressure, exactly what you want. That being said, anyone, including me, because I think most of you know that I'm from Long Island, so I know what it's like to live on the ocean, right? I actually lived on the Sound side, so I'm not sure I can really claim that. But anyway, when you live in a place that's kind of near water and near an ocean, you're going to have volatility. The area is going to have weather. There is no doubt about it. And that is where vintage comes in, right? Climate is one thing. The climate is maritime. The climate is something that is pretty set. But the weather is something that's going to vary from year to year, right? Climate is about 30 years of weather data, and then we start to make a determination. Weather is what happened this year. So you've got to pay attention here, because some years there's going to be rain, and that's going to be a problem. So for instance, I'm going to give you some examples here. Spring frost, right? So this is the dreaded thing. You do not want this to happen, because if you get spring frost, that's going to mean that your little young, beautiful vines will be frozen, and their growth will be stunted. And then you're going to lose the potential of the season, right? You get one shot in viticulture. This isn't vegetable growing. You get one shot. So if you get the spring frost, that's a problem. So again, mitigating factors like the breezes, like the warmth, like the humidity, like the Gulf Stream are going to help, but it doesn't stop it, right? So some years you're going to get frost, and that's one thing that could be a problem. By the way, spring frost doesn't necessarily decimate the area. A lot of times you'll get a spring frost, and then whatever's left over, although it's small, is really fantastic. So don't immediately hear spring frost and think, oh my gosh, we're done. The best years are usually when August and September aren't very rainy. There's more sun, and you're going to get this beautiful sunshine that's going to ripen the grapes. And so they will be ready in mid-September or, late September for picking. The problem is, right, you want your hot summer days, you want a little bit cooler nights. You don't want it to be too hot. You don't want it to be too rainy. If it's rainy during the growing season, mildew, rot, mold, all of that can happen, right? If there's rain in the spring, you could delay pollination. That's going to be an issue too, going to reduce the yields. If you get rain as part of, at the end, you're going to have a problem there too. So good vintages in the Medoc, they have had a slew of fantastic vintages, and it does vary. Like we talked about with St-Estèphe, they had a great year in 2014 and no one else did. But pretty much from 2005, 2009, 2010, and then 2015 pretty much on. 17 was a little bit rough because there was a frost, has been a gravy train of pretty good vintages for the Medoc. Climate change is happening, right? Right now, this is a fantastic thing in the vineyards, right? I mean, who wouldn't want sunny, consistent weather where you've had to deal with issues in the past? Now we don't really have that as much. So right now, in the space that we're in, climate change is working for Bordeaux, not against it as much. It really is producing really healthy vineyards and vintages year after year after year. However, if things keep going like this and we see 1 to 2 degrees change over the course of time, now we're going to see a change in the profile of the wine, especially in the Merlot. And then you have a bit of a problem. Merlot makes up an enormous proportion of a lot of these blends. Not as much in the Medoc. Cabernet is really, the Cabernet Sauvignon is the big grape here, but Merlot is the lead in a lot of cases, and it's very important, and it is prone to high alcohol. So again, climate change could be an issue. That being said, the Medoc has been incredibly proactive. 80% of the vineyards are being farmed with some sort of eye towards environmental sustainability, with some sort of environmentally sound practice. This is a 180 from how things used to be done. I mean, it was just used to be like, kill and plow. That is not the way that people do things anymore. And all you have to do is listen to any of these producers on any of the shows that we've done, and you will hear them. They care. They want these vineyards to continue to grow and go and be handed down year after year after year. They are trying to reduce their environmental impact. In fact, in the Medoc, they're so passionate about it that they're trying to codify it into the AOC that you have to reduce your carbon emissions, and you have to use renewable energy, and you have to do that in a certain time frame. And if you don't do it, then the producers will, you won't be able to call it the AOC. And that is the kind of progressive and innovative thinking that we see out of Medoc over and over again. Now, a lot of people think, oh, Bordeaux is old and stodgy. Not true. so many of the innovations that come out of winemaking, micro-oxygenation, and the idea of blending. My God, what's old is new again. They're using amphora. All of these things are coming out of Bordeaux. There is a lot of research. There's a lot of knowledge. The study of terroir, so focused in Bordeaux. They are savvy. They are adaptable. And Medoc is an interesting place because the adage normally in Europe, and I'm not talking about the New World, but in Europe, is that really hillside viticulture is the only thing going. Medoc is the place that bucks this. It defies it completely because it's largely undulating, right? But pretty flat. We don't see a lot of slopes here. We're not talking about 100 or 500 meters. We're talking about places that the highest point in the Medoc is 43 meters or 141 feet. I mean, this is in Listrac, which we'll talk about next time. There's some hillier communes, so there you're going to have different exposures, but mostly when you ask people what exposure do you have, flat, right? They don't have a lot of different exposures, but that's okay. They do have different soil types, and there's three main soil types in Medoc. First of all, Pyrenees, right? We talked about how the Gerond comes out of the Pyrenees. And so you have Pyrenees gravel that flowed out of the Pyrenees, and it mixes with sand and alluvial stuff. And then you have that, and it also mixes with the Gerond gravel. There's some stuff from lower down, and that's also going to give you some interesting flavors. Cabernet Sauvignon loves gravel. Gravel is something that is very well drained. It's something that will allow heat. It will absorb heat, reflect it back onto the grapes. So especially in colder years, that's going to help, especially at night. It will radiate heat and help continue that ripening process. And as those grapes also dig really deep down for nutrients, you're going to get more flavorful and interesting wines. Okay. So again, we have people who are skeptical about terroir, but you definitely see a difference between these old vines that are growing deep and things that are shallow. It's just sort of can science prove everything? No, it cannot. And in this particular case, your taste buds can prove it. So we have to be happy with that. Limestone clay is the one that people don't talk about a lot in Bordeaux. And it is essential. There is a lot of limestone in Bordeaux, which may surprise you, right? Limestone is the province of Burgundy. That's where people in Sancerre and, Champagne's got that. Okay, no, there's also limestone. Of course, there's going to be limestone because limestone is from the sea, right? So places that were flooded at some point have limestone, bedrock, subsoil, all of that. And there is limestone, especially in the Médoc, which we'll talk about in a second, St-Estèphe, the northern communes. You're going to see more limestone. What does that mean for the wines? It means that there's going to be more acidity. There'll be more elegance. Some of these sites are going to be very interesting. When it is mixed with clay, that's really great for Merlot. Again, super important grape. So we want this. We want this variety so that we can grow different things here. Bordeaux is not one thing, it's a blend. And so in order to have that blend, you need to have different soil types. And speaking of the blend, really, that is the secret sauce of the Médoc, okay? The Médoc is all about blend. We don't think about Médoc as being something that's like, usually just Cabernet Sauvignon or just Merlot. When we think about Médoc, the secret sauce is the blend. And the way that they do this is, again, different soil types. We have those different gravels. We have the clay limestone in Médoc. And then we have the idea that, look, we have grapes that are ripening all at different times, right? So Merlot is going to ripen earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot are going to ripen at different times. And so that is going to allow an agricultural hedge. Historically in the Médoc, they've always blended because you don't know what's going to happen with the weather. So if you don't know what's going to happen with the weather, you better make sure you have a lot of different things so that you can stagger. Okay, well, things went great with Merlot, but then it rained and Cabernet didn't do well, vice versa. You've got all this, but then it has become part of the DNA. and to address the issue of terroir. Part of the thing about terroir is also this tradition of winemaking. It's not just about soil, for God's sakes. We got to stop talking about soil as being the only thing terroir is. First of all, I mean, if we were just talking about basic stuff, it would be stuff like, what is the slope? What is the climate? What is the, is there any aspect? What is it? And yes, what are the soil types? But not just that. What are the traditions of this particular area? We have 4 communes here, 4 different traditions, 4 slightly different histories, and that's going to make a big difference. So these blends are what make things unique. And it's why in a place like Polyak, which we'll discuss at the end of the class, even though there are chateaux right next to each other, and they're not that much different, the wines are dramatically different because some of the growing choices, some of the ideas about winemaking, they're all going to differ. And those subtle changes in Medoc are what make these wines so interesting and so flavorful and different, right? You could just keep going and going because it is terroir driven. And let's just talk about the grapes. I mean, I've already mentioned Cabernet Sauvignon. What does it bring? It's vigorous, it's dark, it has body, it's got really great tannin, it has decent acidity. The alcohol isn't out of control, but it has a lot of flavor. It is the backbone in the Medoc. It grows on gravel, it adds longevity and flavor to the blend. Also growing on gravel, right? Petit Verdot. Petit Verdot, if you listen to the podcast with Chateau Siron and Edouard Miaille, love him, so fantastic. We really get into Petit Verdot. It inspired me to do that Petit Verdot podcast because he talked about how beautiful the Petit Verdot is growing on these gravel soils. So Petit Verdot and Cabernet go hand in hand, right? So those are really good things to listen to if you're interested. And then we have our clay limestone group, and that's going to be more Merlot. Merlot likes clay. It doesn't mind having a little bit of cooler soils. Cabernet really needs that heat. Merlot does not want that. Merlot needs cooler soils because it can ripen to a little bit higher alcohol levels. We don't want that. We want it to show beauty. And we want it to show some elegance. We want it to have fruit. We want it to be plush. We don't want the tannins to be out of control. And it does well on clay limestone. Limestone is going to give it that brightness and that freshness, right? Like everybody calls it, right? And then Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is, if you've had it by itself, Cabernet Franc is another one that Cabernet Franc is the parent of Cabernet Sauvignon along with Sauvignon Blanc. And Cabernet Franc has tea-like notes and earthy notes. It has a lot of bouquet, or it has a lot of aroma to it. It's lighter in color. It has a lot of aroma. So that's going to add something else to the blend. So if you take these 4 grapes, and we do have a little bit of Malbec and Carmenere and things like that, but if you take these 4 grapes and put them together, you're going to, in different combinations, you're going to have completely different wines every time. And you couple that with the technology and the traditions here, and you're going to see that, each chateau, if a chateau is on the label, the wines have to be made there. They've got to be, the fruit has to be grown there, and it has to be bottled there. So given that, every place is like its own little appellation, or a little, like area, or basically its own little appellation inside of the appellation. They use things like less than they used to, oak, to do fermentations. Now they're going back to the old ways of doing things like old oak barrels, concrete, amphora. They'll do fermentations in there because they don't want the big oakiness anymore. They're going back to these ideas of terroir. That is what Medoc is about. That is the future of Medoc. It's also the past of Medoc. There was a little period of time when it changed, but that was how it was, right? So they don't use that much new oak, 35 to 45% new oak. Quick run through the history, because I love this stuff. Medoc has been around before Roman times. Medio Aquae is the name for it. It basically meant that it was in between the water, and this is referred to the Gerond Estuary. Just even predating that, 10,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, there was a flood here. And that's going to play into the history a little bit later. And that flooded most of the Medoc and the marshlands, and that made it very difficult to do viticulture here for a very, very, very long time. We had Celts here coming in the 1st century, Romans coming, and they planted what we believe to be the ancestor of Cabernet, Biturica, which is was the grape that was cold resistant and cold hardy. Then they started exporting in 100 AD with the Romans. And then in 1152, the biggest thing for Bordeaux happened, which is that Eleanor of Aquitaine married Henry Plantagenet, I never can say that, the future king of England. And by bringing these two groups together, we had Bordeaux and England having an alliance for over 300 years, and Bordeaux basically owned the English market for wine. And in that time, distribution, marketing, production, all belonged to Bordeaux. England shipped in textiles and metals and things like that. Bordeaux shipped out claret, which was the lighter style of the red wines. I'm sorry, not Bordeaux. Well, it was all of Bordeaux, but the Medoc also. So 300 years of this monopoly. And then we had in the 14th and 15th centuries, the Medoc really gathering steam. By the 17th century, we had people really getting into the Medoc and thinking, wow, this is an area we really want to plant vineyards in. People had more money. And then the Dutch came. The Dutch, the Medoc owes a debt of gratitude to the Dutch in a way that can't even be, it can't even be quantified. The Dutch were major wine buyers, but they were also enormous innovators. They were the first to say, hey, guess what? We're going to add a little sulfur to the wine for transport to stabilize it. That was the Dutch. They did things like racking, taking wines off of the dead yeast cells to clean them up and prevent bacterial spoilage. That was also the Dutch. But the thing that they really did is they took their knowledge of what they were doing in Holland and they drained those marshes that had flooded 10,000 years ago. And what they found, because they wanted more vineyard land, were giant gravel outcrops. Now, there had been in all of these communes places on top of the hillsides that were above the marshy lands where they had vineyards. So it's not as if there wasn't anything here, but it was really spotty here and there. But once the Dutch drained this in the 1600s, now we see a giant leap, better winemaking, introductions of the Chateau, first and second wines, all of the famed wines by the 1700s really were established. And then, of course, it all came crashing down because, sorry for, for this to the French, but we had odium, which is powdery mildew, we had phylloxera from 1872 to 1892, 1875 to 1892, decimated Bordeaux. And then when we started out in the 1850s or the 1800s, we had 25,000 hectares or 61,700 acres. By the time World War I, World War II, the Depression, there was a giant frost in 1956. By the end of the 1950s, there were 6,000 hectares or 14,000, almost 15,000 acres. That was about a quarter of what it once was. So after this period, again, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the podcast that I did with Chateau Siron, because Edouard talks about these very dark days in the 70s and the 80s before Robert Parker came along and really thought, wow, these wines are amazing. When that happened, before that happened, it was a really dark time for Bordeaux. They did not have money to invest. But Parker, despite what you might think about him and his style and what he, his influence, he changed the face of the Medoc. And because of that, one cannot really fault him because it changed everything. The wines came back into fashion, and they have been on this run ever since, right? So the Medoc today has so much to offer. And the thing that it has to offer, and what we're going to really talk about, is the affordable luxury. It looks like everything is expensive. It looks like, oh my gosh. I always say, what the thing about it is? It's not the Medoc. It's not the farmers. It's not the people there. It's sometimes the buyers of the Medoc. It's the people who talk about the wines, the people who can afford to buy the really high-end chateau. It's very off-putting, at least for me. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, oh my God, I can't do that, right? But the famed chateau, those people are also farmers. And I think that it's very important to know that. Today, we have a lot of women-owned and women-run wineries, which you know that I am always really pro on. Small growers, large growers. You know, we talked to, again, Anne Lenora and Chateau Menet, and we talked about how a bank owns that. Well, that bank has had its fingers in agriculture for hundreds of years. It's not like Bank of America going in and being like, oh, let's just, look at that vineyard and let's reduce the cost. That's not how it works here. Also, a lot of foreign investment, very international. I always feel comfortable talking to people in Bordeaux because they never make fun of me for having bad French. They're not offended. They talk to all sorts of people. And it's all about it being inclusive. I mean, mostly because it's worth so much money. Apparently, according to the Medoc, right, 50 million bottles, half production is exported, 60% of the rest of the world, 40% of the EU, 600 million to €1 billion, which is 700 million to about $1.2 billion every year is turned over. I mean, that's how much they make. You could buy 50 high-speed trains or 20 A320 Airbuses. So it is a lot of money, right? It's worth it to them to keep things going. I want to show you something real quick. Besides some pretty pictures, right? So this is the area that we're going to talk about. This map is going to show up a lot, so I'm not going to belabor the points, but here are some pictures that you can look at of Medoc. Okay, so these are gravel soils, right? These are more limestone clay soils. And then these two things are very, very good examples of how things are fairly flat here. We don't see, this is not, we're not talking about Mosel. We're talking about a fairly flat area. And here, this is Château Latour, which is in Polyak. We see the river. And that's going to be really important also in terms of influence. So very, very interesting things, right? These are the grapes that we talked about. Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot. I don't know if I would be able to tell the difference in the vineyard. In fact, I know I probably couldn't, but there is a big difference, right? Look, Merlot is tighter bunched, certainly than Cabernet Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon also has looser bunches and is a little darker. So you can see those differences. This is what I wanted to show you. We're talking about classifications. There were a number of classifications done in this historical area. The 1855 classification, which I'm not going to get into too much detail there. Again, there's a whole podcast on Bordeaux classifications, but this was something done actually in 1855. Emperor Napoleon II said, okay, well, we're having the Universal Exposition in Paris. We need our best wines to show. They went to the Medoc, where all of the prestigious chateaux were, and said, give us a list. And so the Chamber of Commerce said, okay. They tried a couple different ways. And finally, they just said, okay, you know what? There's a price list. We're going to go by price. This is who's getting what and where and all of that kind of stuff. So they had 5 levels. They had the Premier Grand Cru Classé, which is the first growth. And we can see that in Chateau Margaux. There are 5 of those. And then they had others. And usually those will just say Grand Cru Classé in 1855. Chateau Cantomerle is from the Haut-Médoc, and that is something that was classified as a 5th growth. Then, so those are very prestigious. They still are relied upon today by collectors, but it's such a small percentage of wines, okay? And incidentally, 5th growths are not out of reach for us. Most people can't afford a $300 or maybe even $100 bottle of wine, but you could save up and get a $50, $55 bottle of wine. And yes, it's a special occasion wine, no doubt, but you will be able to get a 5th growth for that. It may not, however, sometimes be as good as some of these other classifications. And the one that I really love is Cru Bourgeois. These are also only wines in the Medoc. Again, these 1855 wines are the Medoc, and there's a couple in Grave, but mostly the Medoc. And Cru Bourgeois also in the Medoc, and these wines cannot be classified in the 1855 classification. This is dates back to the Middle Ages, and there's a long story about how it got to be called Cru Bourgeois. But the point here is that There are 3 different levels. There's the Cru Bourgeois, there's the Cru Bourgeois Supérieur, and the Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel. And this tag is generally, you will find that on the back of a bottle or on the neck of a bottle of the Cru Bourgeois. These are very high quality. You have these 3 levels, and all of them tend to be very good value for money. Some of them are quite inexpensive. Some of them are very good value for money, right? Quite a little bit of a distinction. And then we have the Cru Artisan, a very small, if anybody knows the underground wine events that in better times I would run with my partner Laura, this is like the underground wine events of the Medoc. The Cru Artisan, 36 properties. They're very small. Again, another classification that's been around for about 150 years, but these are small properties that have really, you have to live on the property and you have to tend the vines yourself. So a very interesting thing. Okay, we are going to get, let me just see it in the Q&A. Adam, the wines are blends, but are all the wines that come from Medoc only using grapes from the Medoc? Yes, like I said, you can only use, if you have your chateau or an appellation, they can only use grapes from the appellation. And if it's a chateau specifically, it has to be from that chateau. You cannot blend from other places. It has to be, and that's why on the cork, on the, yeah, it'll say this, which I don't know if you can see it. It's probably on your bottle. And this it's basically, it's been chateau bottled, grown there and bottled there. So you will not be seeing people use outside of, grapes outside of the area. It's not, you're not allowed to do that. If you do that, you can use Bordeaux or Bordeaux Supérieur. Roy, hi Roy, how are you? Cru Artisan can be Medoc and Haut-Médoc. It actually can be anything. It can be Margaux. It can be, and I'll as we're going through the communes, I'll tell you who those are. Doug, what's up, Doug? Define differences between superior and exceptionnel. Yes, they meet slightly different standards, and they're deemed by tasting panel to be better. So there's some in the exceptionnel that are there. It's a much more elite group. Again, actually in the podcast with Chateau Pauillac, we talked about how they hoped at some point to be exceptionnel, but it's very hard to get into that. So yes, and that classification is relatively new. So we'll see how that shakes out over the years and how much litigation there'll be about it. Bruno, do you think Bordeaux will be seeing more bio and natural wines? They certainly will. We'll talk about that as we go through the communes here, and we've got to get to that. Luke, are newly approved varieties in climate change? They are not. I just learned this. Not approved for Medoc, only for Bordeaux and Bordeaux Supérieur. Those 5 new varieties are not allowed to be used in Medoc. So none of these communes are permitted to use it. Only if you're going to classify your wines as Bordeaux and Bordeaux Supérieur. Now that doesn't mean they aren't growing them, incidentally. You can still grow them, but you can't put them in your wines. Okay, I am going to go back. I don't want to get too hung up on this. We'll go back to the Q&A in a bit. Let's go to Medoc, okay? And I'm going to show, let's go up to the map here and we'll talk about this because we do want to drink our wines, don't we? We're this is the Medoc, right? Beautiful, bucolic Medoc. And this is the largest appellation in the Medoc. Now, very confusing, okay? It spans, I'm going to talk about this, okay? So it covers this entire area of the Medoc. It's sort of like when people say, all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. So everything can be Medoc, but not Medoc can't be everything. I don't know if that's really a good analogy. It's a little rough. Okay, that's a little rough. But here, if MC Ice was here, he would totally make fun of me for that. Okay, so the Medoc is the entire enchilada. That's the whole area. If you make wine in San Julian, and I don't know why you'd want to do this, and you decide that you want to call it Medoc, maybe you want to use grapes from somewhere else also, then you can call it Medoc. Okay, you're entitled to use that. But there is also, and so, like this entire 80 kilometer, 50 mile stretch, and it's just like 10 miles across, 10 kilometers across or 6 miles wide, not that big, but there is an exclusive area that is only entitled to Médoc AOC, the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, and that is in this northern portion. you can only use Bordeaux Superior, Bordeaux, or Médoc here, right? So Médoc is the most prestigious of those appellations, and that is where most of these chateaux are. These are high quality wines. They are normal. They're at normal prices usually. They're usually a steal. This is 13,700 acres, or about 5,500 hectares just for this little area, okay? 34% though of production is, or I'm sorry, 34% of the vineyard area is in Medoc, and that includes, the outlying areas all around as well. 36 million bottles with 3 million cases a year. And we already said it's about 8 million and 8.3 million total. That's a lot of wine. And now we have about 440 wine growers, a bunch, about split about evenly between the regular independent producers, and then we have a bunch of cooperatives here, so which have been invaluable over the years, especially as Medoc has had problems, with things like frost and things like that. You can pull your resources, which is really great. So when we go back to the idea of the Cru Bourgeois, there's 122 Cru Bourgeois from Medoc, right? So you can easily find a great Cru Bourgeois from the Medoc, right? Like we have right here. And again, I've got a Cru Bourgeois from my Chateau Castera, and I have the Cru Bourgeois right here. I hate that you can't see that very well. It's right there. Okay, so there's that 9 Cru Artisan in all, in 9 out of 36. That's a lot. In the Medoc, 76 other properties. And the grapes are 40% Cabernet Sauvignon, 55% Merlot. So it is a lot of Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc make the balance, right? There's a tiny bit of Carmenere and Malbec here. Because of where this is, again, we'll go back to the nerdy map. You're right near the water, right? You're near the ocean. So here you have strong oceanic influences, you have coastal influences, and these are going to be cooler sites. Why is it 55% Merlot? Because you've got the coolness, right? Merlot, we said, that's where you want to be growing this. There's also limestone here. So you've got those coastal breezes. You're going to get that freshness, varied terroir, varied styles. Okay. So it's not just a one note. You have those alluvial terraces of gravel. That's going to be working for Cabernet Sauvignon, the clay-based soils for Merlot, and that's going to work for that. There are areas that you are not allowed to farm. They're very strict about where you're allowed to farm and where you're not allowed to farm. If the stuff is impermeable, if it's too close to the water, you can't farm it. So again, the thing about the Medoc appellation is that there are so many complex and interesting soils here. And it can also, by the way, for those of you who know Bordeaux well, it can be like the right bank because there is a lot of Merlot here. But these wines are so much more than I think what a lot of people pass them over. So let's try our wine. And again, we'll just go over the procedure for tasting. I have my big honking glass. Yes, this is huge. This is a Bordeaux glass, right? Goes straight up to let that air in. We want to really try to get that air in. So we first look at the wine and we fan it out. I always like to look at my fingers. I think somebody said, did my thumb injury. I actually cut it on the foil. I always do this. I cut it on the foil. I want them to get rid of foil on top of these bottles. I cut my finger all the time and it was a gusher. I know that's really gross, but it is what it is. All right. You asked, I mean, it is what it is. All right. So here, you see that the color is pretty dark. So there's a decent amount of color here, decent amount of ripeness. All right. So spin it around your glass and you can look at the legs or the tiers and how they come down. And that's going to give you an indication of how much alcohol. Of course, it's on every bottle. So you can also look at that. But on my bottle, I've got 13%. Great. That's just, perfect. Bordeaux is a medium bodied wine. And we're going to find that out. That will be a conclusion that hopefully we can draw at the end of this. Okay. Swirl it around, take a sniff. So my wine is really lovely. It smelled floral. It smelled like a little bit of that black currant fruit, like pear and blackberry had a baby, which is always what I say about black currant because Americans don't really have a reference point for it. You taste some earth, but it tastes very bright. It's very, the acidity is lively, lighter tannin. It's a smooth wine. I do love the fact that wine.com gives these stickers. So I can tell you that this wine was $25. And it really is such a fresh in terms of the fresh fruit flavors that are here, and also the acidity, a nice balance of tannin, a nice everyday wine. This is a lighter style wine, but very high quality. And yes, $25 is not nothing, but for a wine of this quality, for this kind of balance of fruit, earth, that acidity, and mild tannin, and just its food friendliness, this moderate body. This is exactly the kind of wine that you could have on a weeknight, or you could serve at a dinner party. It would go with so many different things, vegetarian fare, like mushrooms and eggplant. It could even go with seafood if you have the right sauce, on top of with fish, because it's not too heavy. My wine is the Chateau Castera. And I saw somebody just asked that. So lovely property. I mean, 66% Merlot on the property, 26 Cab, and 2% Petit Verdot. And that is not uncommon. Deep gravel for the Cab, clay for the Merlot, and not too much new oak, not more than 45% new oak. Of course, that's going to change every year. It will vary depending on the year. And mine is a 2015, again, another fantastic year. And with a little bit of age, this wine is very, very nice. It's not going to go for that much longer. Medoc does not age, generally speaking, for that long. There are some exceptions to that, the general Medoc AOC, but they are lovely wines. And these are the kinds of wines that, I think are very eye-opening, because you think to yourself, God, that's not very much money. And again, you can get it for like $15. Most of these wines are $15 to $30, except when we get into, some of the smaller appellations, especially Polyak, just because there's not a whole lot of wine to be had. Let me look at the questions. The chat is exploding. I'm going to go into the Q&A here. Let's see, Louisa. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're still awake. She's in the UK. I love you. You're so awesome. Do you have to apply for Cru Bourgeois status? They changed it. It used to be yearly. Very good question. Then they changed it to every 5 years. And there are people balking at that because it is a really onerous process. So we'll see if it changes to 10, which is really what people would prefer. But right now it's every 5 years. It used to be just the wine. Actually, you could make like a bunch of wines and your chateau would not be classified, just your specific wine. So they're working out the kinks. But again, if you know nothing else about a wine and you see Cru Bourgeois on it, it's not a bad indicator of quality. Brian, I owe you an email, but I've been busy with this. I'm sorry. Is the movement to make the AOP sustainable a wine grower-based movement? It's wine growers. These are the people that are dealing, and they are inside the vineyards every day, and they are seeing that they want to make these changes, but they want to put pressure on people who don't want to make those changes. So it is wine grower based, and the associations of each of the communes are really pushing on this. So it's great. Okay, David, what is your view of second and third growth labels as a source of value? Well, some of them are not value anymore, right? Some of them are so expensive, it doesn't even make sense. And then at that point, David, wouldn't it make sense for us to maybe look at like just somebody who's making the best wine that they can under a less prestigious appellation? I mean, we really need to start thinking about that, because it's great that these, wonderful wines exist, but they're not accessible for most of us. And there's all this other stuff that is. So should you be going for prestige? I mean, it's up to you. That's what you want to do. But I prefer to find some of these gems that are totally affordable. And I do. We are never without Bordeaux in our house. And I'm never not aging a Medoc at any given time in my house. I buy them on the vintage, right? So like if I think, I have a bunch of 2005s, they're not even close to being ready. I bought a bunch of 2015s. I'm just having them on this rotating cycle. Are they things that you've heard of? Sometimes they are, but I don't have any first growths in there. No. And I don't even have like super seconds or anything like that. I am aging things that I think are beautiful. These wines are great. They don't have to be super expensive. Okay. All right. We are going to move on to the Haut-Médoc. Now, Haut-Médoc, the upper Medoc here is different. This is not the same area. So when we think of Haut-Médoc, we are talking about this pink area, 37 miles from north to south. And we are upstream of the Gironde. We are not right on the river in most places. There are some spots where you're on the Gironde. 21 communes, and 6 of them include these named famous communes. So again, I don't know why you would do this, but let's say you decided you did not want to put Saint-Julien on your label. You could just call it Haut-Médoc. You could also call it Medoc, right? You could call it both. You could call it Bordeaux or Bordeaux Superior. It's like nesting dolls, if you've ever seen those, right? The big nesting doll is Bordeaux, and then Bordeaux Superior, and then Medoc, and then Haut-Médoc, and then these communes. So, but some of the best values, I think, are in the Haut-Médoc. This is where, to me, things get really exciting. It's not say Medoc has beautiful everyday wines, but this is where, man, you want to talk about a place where stuff is underrated. This is where we are, right? Same thing, Romans were here. We have one of the oldest chateaux in Bordeaux is La Tour Carnet, and that dates back to the 12th century. That is in Haut-Médoc. Used to be swamps and marshlands, really started cooking and getting better after the Dutch drained the area. And as far back as the early 1800s, we see Haut-Médoc being a place where people are like, yeah, this is awesome. So yes, it encompasses the communes, but there are certain zones that are only entitled to Haut-Médoc, right? Like you can't call it, you could call it the overarching Medoc, but like you can't call it Polyak. It's only Haut-Médoc. And that's great. 10,670 acres or 4,300 hectares, 28% of the Medoc vineyards. And again, this is a regional appellation because it encompasses others, right? So again, the nesting doll thing, 29.5 million bottles or 2.5 million cases a year, 301 wine growers. Most of them are independent. 226 of them are independent and 63 are participating in the cooperative. So you have a lot more independence. Now here you have 5 chateaux that are classified in the 1855 classification. You have 88 Cru Bourgeois, so 122 in Medoc, 88 here, 17 Cru Artisan, mostly in the Haut-Médoc, and then you have 116 other classified chateaux that are just great, right? So that goes back to that question. There's 116 great chateaux here that we might not be thinking of because they're not classified. That's kind of silly, right? There's got to be some really great stuff here, and there is. Cabernet, 44%, Merlot 49%, and then Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc 4% and 3%, not negligible compared to Cab and Merlot, which are the big blending grapes of the Medoc. Big appellation. So from a climate standpoint, we have a lot of those mesoclimates. We do have variation, but if you're closer to the estuary, you're going to be a little milder. You might have cooler summers. You might have warmer winters. The farther west you get, again, I'll just show you the map. So I'm not just talking about, the farther west you get here, right? You're going inland, away from the estuary west. That's where you're going to have more extreme diurnals. And that's where you'll have spring frost being a problem. And that's an issue for the growers that do viticulture there. But here, again, pretty flat land. You can see from the pictures, 20 to 40 meters. So we're talking about like 131 feet at its highest point, right? And that's farther away from the river. You have that Gerond gravel, you have limestone, you have sand. In the north, right, in this northern area, you're going to see more limestone and gravel and some clay. And that in harvest is way later because the farther north you are, the later the harvest is, right? Margaux harvests a week ahead of St-Estèphe often. The west has more clay content, so that's where you're going to see more Merlot. The south, you're going to have more warm temperatures, gravel, things like that. The top areas are going to have deep gravel soils, okay? So let's taste our Medoc wine with the idea that I just told you there's a whole bunch of different soil types and that it's very varied. The common thread often with Medoc or Haut-Médoc is that it's generally not just a one-note wine. There's more going on here, and that it deserves a lot of exploration. This is like, you should be starring your paper right now because this is affordable and it's something that's really interesting. Okay, so take a look at it. Mine is lighter. I have the Chateau L'Anescent 2015. The grapes, it doesn't say what the grapes are, but their blend is usually more Cabernet than Merlot. So the styles, you might have something, depending on what you got, you could have something more full bodied. You could have something that is tannic, that's going to age for a really long time. That's going to sit in that refrigerator, or the one of the other like 3 million refrigerators. I have a lot, you know, it might be sitting somewhere and aging. Or it could be a lighter style that I want to drink right now because it only needs like 5 or 6 years, and that's going to be elegant and lighter but still have some depth to it. Okay, so Chateau L'Anisson has 52% Cab, 37% Merlot. If you happen to have it, a little bit, like 9% Petit Verdot. Nice and dark, but lighter. Actually, my wine is a little bit lighter, interestingly, than the Medoc. Let's give it a swirl around the glass and take a sniff. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I have so much more depth in this wine. I mean, now we're talking about more flowers. We're talking about more earth. We're talking about more black currant, blackberries. It smells like almost like there's a little bit of red apple in there. There's some, you know it's going to be a little acidic. It smells a little minerally. All those things are kind of exciting, right? Okay, swirl it and then take a sip. Hold it in your mouth. Notice how those tannins, the mouth drying tannins, the acidity underneath your tongue. Delicious, right? I hope that you think yours is delicious too. I think mine is absolutely delicious. So again, totally delivered on everything that I said. Now, I opened this wine yesterday because I do find that Bordeaux tastes better a day after you open it or 2 days after you open it. This wine definitely lived up to that. I'm gonna look forward to seeing what it's gonna taste like tomorrow, but it's got, you know, there's a lot of nicer, like fuller tannins. It's a little bit richer. Here you feel like there may be a little bit more going on. It's a bit heavier. It's a little more, like a little bit less every day. I mean, this wine is only what, $5 more than the other. It's $29, $30 versus $25. And again, there are plenty of Haut-Médocs that are in the $18, $20 range, and you can even get them for less. But here, you know, this idea of just really kind of a little bit more depth, you taste more going on, you know that there's more kind of a little bit more sense of place, that terroir idea. And one thing to note, and I'm going to say this again and again and again, this is not a full-bodied wine. Even when we get to Polyak, Bordeaux, if you take it in the scheme of all the wines that we drink, it is never, ever, ever, at least not now, hopefully it won't get there, a full-bodied wine by New World standards, by any stretch of the imagination. It is always medium-bodied. It is always food-friendly. It is always full of at least some acidity. It is never as heavy as something out of, you know, a really warm climate in the New World. You're not going to get Paso Robles or Lodi. You're not going to get Barossa. That's not what Bordeaux is. Bordeaux is middle of the road, and it often is called, you know, full-bodied. That's not necessarily true. All right, quick. I'll just go back to the Q&A real quick, and then we can get to our last two. Hi, Greg. Define the growths again. That was the Cru, that was the 1855 classification. So the first growths, those 5, Chateau Margaux, I didn't name them, but Chateau Margaux and Latour, Mouton Rothschild, Haut-Brion, and Lafite Rothschild. Those are the 5 really expensive. And then there's the second growth, third, fourth, and fifth growths, and that is in the 1855 classification. And they're very esteemed wines, and almost all of them they're among the most expensive. There's some stuff on the right bank that's more expensive. Lori, are the new Cru Bourgeois classifications just a new lens? No, Premier Cru and Grand Cru are not allowed in that classification. These wines are outside of that classification, so they would not be in that, if that's what you're asking. Doug, there's 240 Cru Bourgeois or thereabouts, sometimes 240 to 280. You see one in Trader Joe's for less than $10. give it a try. That's all I can tell you. Actually, Trader Joe's has a couple really good Bordeaux. They occasionally get these great deals on these wines. Don't count it out for sure. I mean, it does have to go through a pretty rigorous process. So you can't really tell the Haut-Médoc styles from the bottle, but that's where you're going to go into Cellar Tracker and look that up, because Bordeaux, Cellar Tracker is rich and full of lots of great tasting notes there. Christopher, sorry. There are many vintages of Lanison available. How young is too young to drink? Again, Haut-Médoc is going to age a little bit more, but this wine at 2015 is drinking beautifully. Is it going to really go the distance? Is it going to be like a 20-year ager? I don't think so. So if you wanted to get this wine, I would say, 2015 or younger would be fine. Greg asked, full-bodied equals higher alcohol. Yeah, there's a number of factors, right? Ripeness of fruit, how full it is, how rich it is. Yes, higher alcohol, but also, is it really mouth-filling, right? So that's where it's almost like, people use milk. I think the idea of milk is really good. It's like skim milk is a light-bodied wine, and then 2% versus whole milk. There's no whole milk here. They don't do whole milk, at least not in the wine world. All right, it's 9 o'clock. I want to make sure that I respect your time. So let's do, because I said it was only gonna be an hour, but it looks like we're gonna bleed into an hour and 15. I hope you can stay. St-Estèphe. So St-Estèphe, we'll go back to the map, and St-Estèphe is the northernmost commune here. So in terms of communes, right, these are regions. It's not the northernmost appellation, but it's the northernmost commune. So now we are in these communes, the orange and the green. That's what we'll cover tonight. And then we will look at the dark green and purple and kind of bluish and orange on next week. But St-Estèphe is here. It is the northernmost commune. The appellation is really, it's interesting. It's actually almost like smack dab in the middle of the whole Medoc. It is centered around the town of St-Estèphe, and then there are a bunch, we're still in the Medoc here. It's centered around the town of St-Estèphe, and then there are a bunch of vineyards sort of in satellite areas, the Ludi. So borders Polyak in the north, right? Polyak is right here. And then, the Haut-Médoc and other areas, it's really just divided by a stream. It's St-Estèphe and Pauillac. So it almost bleeds into itself. And it is, in my opinion, the best example of what I have seen in my almost 2 decades in the wine industry. I can't believe it's been this long. So in this time, I have not seen any area in the Medoc turn it around as much as St-Estèphe. And it's because they have done something really unique with the terroir. Let me give you the stats first, and then we'll talk about what St-Estèphe has been able to do to really shift and turn things around. There are 1,229 hectares or 3,000 acres, 8% of the Medoc vineyards. We're getting small now, okay? 8 million bottles or 667,000 cases, 74 wine growers. 57 are independent. There's 17 that take part in the co-op. 5 Grand Cru Classé, those growths in 1855, they make up about 20% actually of the St-Estèphe's land. And some of them are quite famous. So you might have heard of Côte d'Asternal or Chateau Montrose. Those are second growths. Never mind that though, 19 Cru Bourgeois. And these are stunning and excellent and affordable. There's one Cru Artisan. Somebody had asked about the Cru Artisan. Yes, there's a Cru Artisan in St-Estèphe. 32 other chateaux, again, for you to explore that are not classified. 49% Cab Sauv, 43% Merlot, 4% Cab Franc, and then we have some Petit Verdot. So St-Estèphe here, we had the Roman occupation, and the thing that St-Estèphe has had going for it is it's on the water. So there is a port here. It is certainly not as bustling as Polyak, which Polyak made its reputation because it has a very active port. But here, some smaller chateau. The issue for St-Estèphe has always been its distance from Bordeaux, right? So if you are trying to get wine into Bordeaux or out of Bordeaux or into Bordeaux, or you're trying to do trade, you are the last man on the totem pole. And that distance, when people were transporting things over a horse and buggy, could really put you at a disadvantage. So it did in some ways stunt the growth of St-Estèphe, because of its distance from Bordeaux, the city of Bordeaux, not Bordeaux, obviously it's part of the region. Even after the marshes were drained, it didn't have the prestige. And the other thing is that it's cool. So as, again, cooler parts of the Medoc, you have limestone soils here, you do have clay also. What's interesting here, though, is that it's often the last place to harvest in the Medoc. And it can do, even though it's cool, it can do extremely well in hot vintages. So if you hear, and again, this is what I'm talking about, the Meso Climates, if you hear that Bordeaux is, oh my gosh, it was on fire, it was such a hot year, 2009 was sort of like that. Some people really like that style, some people didn't. Go for St-Estèphe, because there, even though it's hot, it's still going to be much more moderate in body. And that proximity to the Gironde and to the Atlantic really works in its benefit. Now, the downside of this for St-Estèphe is that it's, you know, diverse terroir, but it can be harder sometimes to ripen the grapes. So they don't have a lot of elevation. They have some slopes. There's a lot of diversity of wine style depending on where you are. But the thing that they do have is a lot of clay subsoil. So Merlot does quite well here. And actually they are growing a little bit more Merlot here, although Cabernet is always going to be the dominant thing here, because to take advantage of that clay subsoil, sometimes Cab, when it grows on clay, can get very brawny and it can be very tough. And St-Estèphe, like I said, 15, 20 years ago, was known to be this rustic kind of backwater. Oh, well, it's part of the Medoc, but it's not really that great. That is no longer the case because they've done an impeccable job of doing research and matching grape type to soil, to getting the flavors right, to making sure that they're doing things in the winery and in the vineyard that are going to promote the development of these wines. So you don't have to hold them for 25 years before they're drinkable. They're imminently drinkable, right? So growing some things on limestone subsoils can sometimes add to that freshness, the acidity, the elegance, and that can help offset things growing on clay, which sometimes can be a little denser and heavier. So all of that is going to make a difference. And that idea is why they have made such a huge leap. Let's taste our wine. And again, we're just moving towards bigger and bigger here, more powerful wines. This is, again, a dark wine, more Cabernet Sauvignon. I have the Chateau Menet 2016. They sent me the wrong wine, which was my luck. So I was going to get the second wine, but I have the first. And spin it around a glass and just take a sniff. And here again, you get now even more depth, more fruit, right? More of that black currant coming out. Now something like leather is coming out, more like tobacco, almost like cedar or cigar, but not overpowering, right? There's still some fresh fruit there underneath, minerals and sort of like rocks. There's almost a saline note in my wine. Strong tannins offset by good acidity, nice fruit. The impression overall is, yes, the wine needs food, in my opinion, but it certainly would do well with something with protein and fat. But at the same time, the overall impression is not of something too weighty. Yes, it has tannin, but those flavors are very, very defined. Those fruit flavors, the dark fruit flavors, the minerals, all of that is really coming together. Beautiful wine, for sure. And hopefully you have something from St-Estèphe that's the same. There are so many producers. I love poking around St-Estèphe, and it does not have to be Cru Bourgeois, and it does not have to be anything classified. I'm telling you, it's so underrated, great values, things that are not that expensive, and you just leave them open or decant them for a day or two. So delicious. So, St-Estèphe is another one of those ones where you're like, there's a lot here. Some of these wines are not super heavy, and some of them are not super expensive, and not everything is Côte d'Estournel, but some things grow awfully close and on things that are like it. So again, another one really to take advantage of. And it can do well in vintages where other places don't. So St-Estèphe is really great. And like I said, when all else fails, go for a Cru Bourgeois out of St-Estèphe because they're amazing. All right, let's hit Polyak and then we'll take whatever questions are left. Pauillac is probably the most famous of all of the communes, okay? So here we're moving sort of, again, in the center of the Medoc. It's about 31 miles or 50 kilometers from Bordeaux city. We've got St-Estèphe in the north, Saint-Julien in the south. It's on the water. And anything that looks out at the water in Bordeaux is generally considered to be very high quality. Not all of Pauillac looks over the water, but a lot of it does. And it has a port. So historically, that made shipping their wines out a very profitable proposition. People were like, yeah, okay, I can get those wines. And so I am going to buy them, and they're really delicious. So you see that, I'm sorry, I didn't advance the slide here, but Pauillac has that port, and it has been famous for a lot of history because the wines could get there. Also, a lot of merchants moved in when, during that period in the 17th and 18th centuries, because it was a great place to be. There was hustle and bustle. It wasn't a completely backwater small town. Polyak is Cabernet Sauvignon based. Polyak is the longest lived of all the Bordeaux reds. The thing about Bordeaux in general, not just Medoc, but Bordeaux, is that it is one of the only still wines in the world that has the longevity that, has incredible longevity. You just don't find that anywhere else. I mean, maybe Barolo and a couple of other places, but Polyak would be the prime candidate. It lasts forever. It continues to have complexity and change. It is not a big area. There's only 3,000 acres or 1,200 hectares here. It is 7.5% of the vineyards. That is why it's expensive. There isn't a whole lot of wine here. We've got 7.2 million bottles of Polyak a year being made, and that's it, give or take, right? That's in a decent year, 600,000 cases. 54 people, 54, that's it, grow grapes here, that's it. So, most of them are independent, some in co-ops. 18 classified chateaux in 1855, 3 Cru Bourgeois, 22 other chateaux. There are no Cru Artisan. 62% of what's planted here is Cabernet Sauvignon, 32% is Merlot, and then Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot make up the balance. And Polyak is the place that also, with St-Estèphe, so much owes its fame to the Dutch, to that draining, because when they drained it, they found so much gravel here. These gravel outcroppings were so big in Polyak, and that combined with this really lovely, moderate temperature, climate, mesoclimate, that you get this, influence from the Gironde. It's going to be something where you're not going to have that kind of, very cold spring. You're not going to have frost at the end of the season. Polyak is nice and moderate. And for that, sadly, you are going to pay a little bit more. But this is a wine that also, there are some more affordable chateaux and some that are incredibly expensive. The stuff near the water is going to be warmer. The stuff is going to get riper, right? The grapes are going to get riper, and that's where you'll find your top growths. The 3 out of those 5 premier, Grand Cru Classé are here. Mouton Rothschild, Lafite Rothschild, and Chateau Latour are all in Polyak. There are also, there's 15 others that are classified. Most of them are 5th growths. So this undulating terrain, gravel, these main areas with very deep gravel, and then there's some sandy soils. There's gravel everywhere here, though. And so that is going to be conducive to Cabernet Sauvignon, which is where you get that 62% of the blend. They're making enormous progress with biodynamics and organics here. They're doing a lot of work to try to get their vineyards to really great health, as is everybody here. It's not just Polyak, but Polyak they do, in fairness, have a little bit more money. They're smaller. It's easier to mobilize, right? So there's those kinds of things. But they also have incredible winemaking skill and experience, and the blends are unique. I mean, we will taste this wine now, but the thing that I'll say to you is that how is it possible that these great chateaux are right next to one another, and that they use the same grapes and they come out with wines that are markedly different? It is because of terroir, including culture and history of these places. And it really, really shows up in Polyak because it's much smaller. So if you were able to get a Polyak, again, they call it, of course, they call so many things this, the wine press, the iron glove and the velvet, or no, wait, the velvet, what is it? The iron glove and the velvet, the iron fist and the velvet glove, sorry. I knew I'd get it right eventually. So yes, it's got high tannin for sure. And it is bold, but again, I just want you to keep in mind, does this taste like a Napa Cabernet? No, it does not. It does not. So, not too high on the alcohol, at least from what I can see of the Chateau Belgrave, 2018. And my alcohol is 14.5. So it's significant for Medoc, but not too bad. Okay. Wowza. Okay, again, totally different from the St-Estèphe. Here you get something that almost it smells like I just made ratatouille. Like it smells like a bunch of herbs and marinated eggplant. It smells a little meaty. It has leather. It has tobacco. And this is the youngest wine. I mean, this wine is so young. It could go and go and go. So, I mean, just so aromatic, but not a ton of fruit. So many other things though. And again, I mean, I don't think you can say, right? You can't say like, oh my God, it's so over the top. It's not moderate bodied. It really tastes like I just ate a whole bunch of like some sort of herbal something. I mean, all this bundle of sauteed herbs, almost like in butter, this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful wine. I mean, fruit is secondary to the other. But although the tannin is strong, it's smooth. It's very elegant. It has a lot of beauty here, right? Not over the top. Nothing here is over the top. And I do have to say again, yes, this is the most expensive wine that I have here. It was $47.99. That wine is such a baby. I will probably buy another bottle of it to age. But these wines have the potential and they are not out of reach. Okay. The misconception, the horrible misconception that a lot of people are having about the Medoc is that it is only for rich people and it's only fancy wines. And Doug said it himself, there's that $10 Trader Joe's wine. And I say, go for it because you never know. There is so much diversity in the Medoc. There's so much variety. It is not a huge area. It is a place to take a risk. It's a place to try new things. It has so much to offer. Next time, and I'm going to let you go now. Okay. Next time we are that's next week, next Thursday, same time, same place. Little bit less content because I'm going to encourage everybody to watch this. It will be on YouTube if you want to watch it again. We're going to cover the final 4 communes and we will talk about those at length. And then, I hope that this gives you confidence because that my entire, spiel, whatever, my goal is to get you to feel good, right? You should feel good about going and getting these wines. Medoc is not scary. Okay. It's not scary. It's completely accessible and it's great. You know Cabernet and Merlot and Cab Franc, and you might know Petit Bordeaux, especially if you live on the East Coast and have experience, with Virginia wines. These wines are fantastic. Go for it. Do not be afraid. Do not fear the Medoc. These wines are to be enjoyed and they are very modern in style. And God knows they are some of the best food wines that you're going to have. Okay. So, Gina asked, can you suggest decanting procedure? Do we open and close? Is it okay to Coravin? Yeah, I mean, if you're going to, so super quickly, most of these wines do better in a decanter, being decanted. Again, this is a great decanter, a wine glass. It's not just the pre-made decanter. And these wines are really, they do better with air, right? So an older wine, you don't want to decant for too long because if you do that, it will lose all of its flavor. But a younger wine, you can decant it for 20, 30 minutes and then keep checking it. If you decide to Coravin it, just leave it in the glass. If you live in the South, like I do, you're going to want to put a paper towel over it because inevitably you will have protein matter in it within 5 minutes. But if you don't live in a place like that, you can just leave it open and the air will get in regardless. So yes, they do need some air. They will get better. I open them. I let the air in. Of course, as soon as you open a bottle, oxygen is in there. And then I just put the cork back in and I wait a day or two. So that's that. All right, friends, thank you so much. Thank you to the Vin du Médoc, and thank you to Stephanie and her team for helping, moderate this. I appreciate all of you. Hopefully I don't know what's going on with next week, but hopefully it will be open, but certainly there'll be another handout for next week that will build off of this. And I hope to see you. And if you're patrons, I'm going to hop on over to that call now. So I will see you all there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You are wonderful. You are the best. You are so motivating, so fun, so knowledgeable. We need more people like you. You are a gem.
Stephanie, you are too nice to me all the time. I think you are a gem. We have a mutual admiration society. And thank you, everybody. Okay, so I will see you hopefully next week. And and patrons, just hop over to the other link now. Okay, good night.